They say the desert is empty, but they've never really listened. The wind doesn't just howl, it whispers names. The rocks shift when no one's looking, and if you stand still long enough, something stares back. The desert is not silence, it's waiting. People vanish out there. Some blame the heat, the hallucinations, the isolation. But what about the footprints that lead nowhere? What about the cameras that stop recording the moment someone screams? What about the voices that answer back? Authorities write it off as dehydration. Tourists underestimate how far they've gone. But there are reports that never make the news. Of campsites torn apart with no sign of animals. Of radios picking up voices begging for help in the dead of night. These are not stories pulled from horror movies. They're pulled from missing person files, desert ranger reports, and private journal entries that were never meant to be found. The people in these stories weren't thrill seekers. They were ordinary, just like you. You can still turn this off. Pretend these stories are just myths carried by the wind. But if you're brave enough to stay until the end, subscribe, and when it's over, if you're still here, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We want to know how far the darkness reaches. Jason had driven the Sonoran stretch of Highway 93 more times than he could count. The road between Wickenburg and Kingman was a straight, lonely vein through the desert. But that July night, something felt wrong. The heat pressed against his windshield like a living thing. The gaslight blinked orange. He cursed under his breath. Just past mile marker 16, he spotted a glowing sign flickering in the distance. 24-hour service station, next right. He didn't recall ever seeing it before. The turnoff led to a cracked, narrow road, nearly swallowed by sand. His GPS screen went black. The radio hissed, then went silent. The headlights picked up a low building and a rusted pump beneath a leaning canopy. A neon sign buzzed above the door. Full service, open. No other vehicles, no movement. The only sound was the soft crunch of gravel beneath his tires. Jason pulled in, stepped out, and was hit by a wave of dry heat that seemed heavier than it should have been. The station had a single door, streaked with dust. Inside, the air smelled like mold and stale grease. A dusty ceiling fan rotated above shelves of expired snacks. Behind the counter sat a man in a blue uniform, his head bowed as if asleep. Jason cleared his throat. "Need to fill up?" he said. No answer. He stepped closer and froze. The man's eyes were wide open, unmoving, staring past him. His skin looked dry, stretched too tightly across his face. Jason backed away, heart thudding. He turned toward the pump, intending to fill up and leave, but stopped short. His truck was gone, not moved, gone. No tire marks. No engine in the distance, just empty space and dead silence. His breath quickened. He ran back inside, shouting, demanding answers. The man at the counter hadn't moved. Jason reached out and grabbed his arm. It was ice cold. The flesh felt wrong, like plastic left in the sun too long. A dragging sound echoed from the hallway behind the counter. Something heavy scraped across tile. Jason turned toward it. A child's voice whispered from the dark, "You shouldn't be here." He spun back around. The counter was empty. The man had vanished. Jason stumbled backward, knocking over a display rack. The overhead light flickered, casting jittery shadows across the floor. His skin crawled as a wave of nausea passed through him. He bolted outside, hoping the road had returned, but the desert had swallowed everything. There was no path back to the highway. Just endless sand and rock. He ran without knowing where, legs pushing against ground that seemed to give way beneath his boots. Eventually, he collapsed behind a low boulder, chest heaving. The sky above felt unfamiliar. The stars had a strange tint. In the distance, the gas pump dinged once, then again, then again. At dawn, he walked back toward the station. It was still there, but now looked abandoned for years. The pump was broken. The canopy sagged dangerously. The neon sign was shattered. His truck sat exactly where he'd left it. Dust covered the windshield. Jason opened the door and found the keys in the ignition. When he turned them, the radio came on. A woman's voice whispered through the speakers, "We warned you." Then the signal cut out completely. Jason drove in silence until he reached a truck stop on the edge of Kingman. He asked the clerk if there was a service station near mile marker 16. The man raised an eyebrow. "That place burned down in the early 90s, he said. "Whole crew died. No one's built out there since." Jason insisted he'd just been there, but the clerk only shook his head. "You're not the first to say that." Later, in his cab, Jason checked the dashcam footage. The video froze at the moment he turned off the main road. Nothing but static. At the very end, one frame flashed into focus. Jason sat in the driver's seat, eyes wide and expressionless. Behind him, in the shadowed sleeper cabin, stood something tall and thin, its head tilted unnaturally toward the camera. Two small red lights hovered where eyes should have been. He quit trucking within the month, sold the rig, told friends he was burnt out, but the dreams began shortly after. He would wake to the smell of gasoline. Sometimes he would hear the chime of the gas pump, sharp and clear, echoing through his house when no one else was home. Every year on July 19th, a white envelope appeared in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single paper receipt. Fuel, $0. Attendant. He tried burning the paper. It didn't blacken. He ran it through the shredder. The next morning, it lay whole on his nightstand. His wife found it once and asked about it. He told her it was from a dream. She stopped asking questions after that. One night, he saw something in the hallway mirror. A man in a blue uniform standing just behind him, unmoving, his face stretched into a permanent stare. They call that stretch of highway cursed. People disappear out there, others reappear changed. If you ever find yourself near mile marker 16, running low on gas, and you see a glowing sign that shouldn't exist, keep driving. Don't stop, don't walk inside, don't speak to the man behind the counter, and if the pump dings while no one's around, don't wait to hear it again. Eleanor had spent years chasing abandoned places, old hospitals, forgotten factories, desolate rest stops. She photographed them, shared them online, and made a quiet living off the silence others avoided. On a solo trip through central Nevada, she took Highway 50, known as the loneliest road in America. Near a sagging mile marker, she spotted a building off the road, an old diner. Its metal sign had no name, only the faded outline of letters and chipped red paint. She parked her Jeep in the dirt and grabbed her camera. The front door was locked, but the back window had a gap just wide enough to slip through. Inside, the diner was a perfect ruin. Dust covered every surface, cracked tiles lined the floor, and a broken ceiling fan hung by a wire above red booths that still smelled of syrup and smoke. Eleanor moved slowly, taking wide shots. In one photo, something felt wrong. She zoomed in. A faint reflection showed a woman behind her. She turned quickly. No one. The diner was still empty. She reviewed the image again. The woman had no eyes. Her skin was pale, stretched tight across her face. A waitress uniform hung from her bony frame, hair tied back, mouth sewn shut. Eleanor blinked, checked the next photo, and found the woman again, this time facing away. In the third, she was closer. Eleanor stood in the middle of the room, heart racing, every instinct telling her to leave. She moved to the window she came through, but the latch was sealed shut, rusted like it hadn't opened in decades. The front door wouldn't budge. Her phone showed one bar, but no calls went through. She sat at the counter, forcing herself to stay calm. Behind her, the jukebox clicked in word, though the power was off. It started playing a song Eleanor hadn't heard since childhood. Blue Moon, soft and scratchy, echoed through the diner like it had been chosen deliberately. Behind the counter, something moved. A silhouette passed between the narrow kitchen doors. Eleanor gripped her camera. "Hello?" she called. The air shifted, scented with perfume and burning. A hand emerged, long thin fingers, gray skin flaking. She stepped back, knocking over a stool, then ran to the restroom and locked the door. The mirror was fogged. She turned on the tap to splash her face. Instead of water, dark red liquid poured out. She stumbled back, hitting the wall. In the mirror, the woman stood behind her, motionless. Her face was blank, the skin smooth and featureless. She pointed with one hand, slow and deliberate. Then the mirror cracked. A single line split down the middle. The lights buzzed and went dark. When they flickered back to life, Eleanor was alone again. She opened the door slowly and crept back into the main room. The diner was silent. Her camera lay on the counter, though she didn't remember putting it there. The photos were different now, not what she had taken. They were all of her. Dozens of shots from every angle, entering, exploring, reacting. One showed her sleeping in her car the night before. Another showed her standing at the window before climbing in. One final photo caught her seated in the last booth, looking directly into the lens. Behind her in the image, the pale waitress leaned forward, inches from her ear. Eleanor dropped the camera. The sound echoed too loud. She ran into the kitchen, hoping for a way out. The door led to a freezer, spotless and freezing. Photos covered the metal walls, all of Eleanor, all from impossible angles. One showed her brushing her teeth in a motel. Another showed her on her porch, sipping coffee. The final photo, pinned at eye level, had just been taken. It showed her inside the freezer, staring at the wall of photos. She turned and fled, kicking the door open. The world outside was no longer dim and cloudy. It was night. The diner glowed from the inside, every window lit. She scrambled to her Jeep, started the engine, and drove without looking back. Her GPS rerouted her to a town 2 hours away. When she arrived, she checked her phone. All her photos were gone. Only one remained, the reflection of the cracked diner window. In it, her face was visible, and over her shoulder, the waitress smiled. The GPS showed no record of her detour. She asked locals about the diner. No one had heard of it. She even checked satellite maps. The area where she stopped was empty desert. When she returned home, she backed up her phone, just in case. But the photo wouldn't copy. It remained locked in her gallery, unable to be deleted or moved. She started covering the mirrors in her house with sheets. She couldn't bear to look into them for too long. Every year on July 5th, she receives an envelope with no stamp. Inside is a receipt. Table 5. Eleanor R. never left. The ink is fresh. The paper smells faintly of burnt sugar and coffee. She moved cities 3 times, but the letters still arrive. She stopped photographing abandoned places. Her account went silent. People online assumed she had moved on. In a way, she had. She doesn't go near diners anymore. She doesn't stop on long drives. She doesn't open her curtains after sunset. Some nights, when the world is quiet, she swears she hears Blue Moon playing softly from nowhere, and in the corner of her bedroom mirror, just before she covers it, she sees the faint outline of someone in a waitress uniform watching her from behind the glass. Travis was drawn to isolation. After his divorce, he bought a used camper van and roamed the desert highways of the Southwest, avoiding cities and seeking quiet. One afternoon, in southern New Mexico, his GPS glitched and rerouted him off the main road. The path led to what looked like an old test range. Faded signs warned of restricted access, but the gate was gone. A barbed wire fence ran along the dirt road. Beyond it, vast, untouched sand shimmered in the heat. He parked under a dead tree near the fence and made camp for the night. The area was dead silent. No wind, no insects, no distant hum of civilization. just the dry pulse of a dead place. That evening, while boiling water for instant noodles, he heard what sounded like a radio click on inside the van. He opened the door, but the device wasn't powered. The static rose for 3 seconds, then cut off. Travis shrugged it off. Desert heat did strange things to electronics. At midnight, something knocked on the side of the van. Not wind, not an animal, a distinct series of knocks. 3 short, 1 long. Travis grabbed a flashlight and stepped out barefoot into the cold sand. There was no one there. No tracks, no wind, nothing. The fence stood motionless. On the other side, just past the wire, something glinted. A figure stood at a distance, tall, human-shaped, unmoving. He blinked. It was gone. The next morning, he found small footprints circling the van. Human prints, bare feet. They started at the back and ended right at the driver's side door. He didn't sleep the next night. Instead, he sat awake with a knife in his lap and a flashlight in his hand. At 2:11 a.m., the same knocking came again. Then the radio turned on by itself. This time it spoke. A flat mechanical voice whispered a number, 905. Then silence. He drove away as soon as the sun rose, desperate to shake the feeling that he was being watched. The road was unfamiliar. The desert around him no longer looked natural. The plants were wrong, too symmetrical, too evenly spaced. The sky had a faint tint of green along the horizon. The GPS refused to load. He passed a mile marker, 905. There was no such number on that stretch of highway. He pressed the accelerator, but the van began to slow, as if pushing against invisible resistance. The van died completely near a collapsed guard post. He stepped out, sweating and disoriented. In the distance, he saw a cluster of buildings, military-style structures, half buried in sand. No roads led to them. He began walking, drawn by something he couldn't explain. As he approached, he noticed something odd. There were no doors on the buildings, no windows, just blank, concrete walls. But they hummed, faintly, like power still pulsed inside. He found a hatch in the ground, slightly open, and stairs leading into cold darkness. Against instinct, he went down. The steps seemed endless. At the bottom, a corridor stretched into black. Flickering lights lit the way. The hallway was lined with windows, and behind each pane stood copies of him, not reflections, but silent doubles. Hundreds of them, dressed the same, eyes closed, standing perfectly still. Travis ran. Doors slammed behind him. The corridor grew narrower, forcing him to crouch, then crawl. He pushed through a final hatch and tumbled into open air. He was back in the desert. The van stood where he left it. The sky was normal again. He got in and drove without stopping, not daring to check the time. When he reached a populated town 2 days later, he bought a map. There was no marker 905, no old range, no base. He thought it was over until he saw himself. Not in a mirror, but in the background of a stranger's Instagram post, taken at a gas station he had never visited. In the photo, he stood behind the counter, wearing a uniform, staring dead ahead. Friends began receiving strange calls from a voice that sounded like him, but the words were out of order. Scrambled questions, nonsensical phrases. Return to the corridor. You left something behind. At night, the van radio still speaks. Not words anymore, but fragments, coordinates, timestamps. Sometimes, it plays a loop of his own voice, saying, "I am not me." He unplugged the radio, removed the battery, but it continued broadcasting from somewhere inside the van. He started waking up miles from where he last parked. Once, he found sand inside his lungs. Another time, a long piece of barbed wire wrapped around his left ankle. He never tells anyone the full story, only pieces. When asked about the base, he just says it doesn't exist. But the fear in his eyes betrays him. He avoids mirrors. He never photographs himself. He sleeps during the day and drives at night. He says the sun looks wrong now, that it's not where it used to be. His reflection sometimes moves before he does. There are places in the desert where roads vanish from maps, where fences mark nothing, and doors open two copies of yourself that should not exist. If you're ever drawn toward something that doesn't feel real, turn around. The desert does not forget. It does not forgive. And once it recognizes you, it never lets go. The desert is a place of absence. No crowds, no comfort, no noise to drown out the silence that reveals what we try so hard to ignore. It strips you down, leaves you alone with the things that follow you, the guilt, the questions, the shadows that no longer need night to be seen. And sometimes, if you stray too far off the road, you don't come back alone. 3 stories. 3 stretches of sand that should have been safe. They weren't chasing monsters. They weren't looking for trouble. They were just passing through. But something was already waiting. Something that doesn't live under beds or in legends. Something that wears stillness like a mask and waits behind broken windows, behind locked doors, behind your own reflection. So if you made it to the end of this video, tell us where you're watching from. We want to know how far the desert reached. And if you're new here, subscribe, but only if you're willing to keep walking into places that don't want you there. Because we're not done. The road never ends, and there's always something waiting in the dust.